She stood trembling beneath the chandelier's glow, her husband's fingers digging into her wrist like iron. The crowd pretended not to watch, but one man did. The most powerful duke in all of England stepped forward, his voice cutting through the ballroom like a sharp object. "Unhand your wife." And in that single breath, Kimberly's gilded prison began to crack. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We did love to hear from you. If you enjoy Victorian-era tale stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. The spring of 1812 had been the season of Kimberly Hughes's transformation from hopeful bride to beautiful prisoner. At 19 years of age, Miss Kimberly Ashton, daughter of a modest baronet whose estate in Somerset was respectable but unremarkable, had entered London society with gentle expectations. Her dowry was adequate but not substantial, her lineage decent but not distinguished. She possessed what her mother called understated beauty, soft brown hair that gleamed like chestnuts in candlelight, expressive green eyes that reflected her every emotion, and a grace of manner that came from genuine warmth rather than practiced artifice. She had not expected to catch the attention of Lord Benedict Hughes, a wealthy gentleman of considerable influence, nearly twice her age, with political connections that extended to the highest levels of society. Yet he had pursued her with an intensity that had both flattered and overwhelmed her. He had claimed her hand for the first waltz at the Duchess of Pemberton's ball, had sent her thoughtful gifts of leather-bound poetry collections, had engaged her in conversations about literature and music that made her feel seen, valued, intelligent. "You have such a pure heart, Miss Ashton," he had told her one afternoon in her father's drawing-room, his dark eyes seemingly earnest. So many young ladies concern themselves only with status and appearance. You are different. You possess a rare sincerity. She had allowed herself to believe him, to trust that his attention meant affection, to imagine a future as Lady Hughes. Not for the title or the wealth, but because she had genuinely believed Benedict saw her as a partner, an equal, someone worthy of cherishing. Her parents had been delighted. Her mother had wept with joy. Her father had called it the match of the season for our family. When Benedict proposed after a mere 6 weeks of courtship, she had accepted with a trembling voice and a heart full of naive hope. The wedding had been beautiful. The ceremony at St. George's, Hanover Square, had drawn admiring whispers. Her gown of ivory silk had been the finest she'd ever worn. Benedict had smiled at her throughout the vows, and she had believed every word he spoke. Then came the wedding night, and the morning after, and the weeks that followed, within a month of marriage. Kimberly had watched Benedict's mask slip like porcelain shattering on marble. The gentleman who had quoted Shakespeare became the man who corrected her every word. The suitor who had praised her mind became the husband who forbade her from reading novels he deemed inappropriate. The man who had called her sincere became the jailer who controlled whom she could visit, what she could wear, when she could speak. She had learned to recognize the signs, the tightening of his jaw when she said something he found foolish, the cold silence that preceded his cutting remarks, the grip on her arm that left finger-shaped bruises beneath her long sleeves. She had become expert at hiding, the marks on her skin, the fear in her eyes, the slow death of hope in her heart. By the autumn of 1814, 2 years into her marriage, Lady Kimberly Hughes had perfected the art of invisibility. She smiled at social functions while her soul screamed. She stood beside her husband at dinner parties like a porcelain doll on display. She had learned that survival meant silence, that safety meant surrender. Then came the invitation to the Windsor Autumn Ball, one of the grandest events of the season. Benedict had informed her she would attend. "You will wear the lavender gown," he had said, not asked. "You will speak only when spoken to. You will be a credit to my name, Kimberly. Do not embarrass me." She had not known, as she dressed for that ball with trembling hands, that the evening would change everything. She had not known that among the hundreds of guests in attendance would be Henry Sanchez, Duke of Devonshire, a man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before a storm. The most desired bachelor in England, known for his devastating looks, his quiet authority, and his fierce loyalty to those he chose to protect. She had not known that he would notice her. As Kimberly entered the ballroom that October evening, she did what she always did, made herself as small as possible, kept her eyes lowered, stayed close to Benedict's shadow. The chandeliers blazed overhead, their light catching on jewels and silk, turning the room into a glittering sea of wealth and privilege. Orchestra music swelled from the gallery. Laughter and conversation hummed through the air like champagne bubbles. She tried to disappear into the wallpaper, but across the ballroom, standing in conversation with the Duke of Wellington, Henry Sanchez lifted his gaze and saw her, really saw her. In that moment, as their eyes met for the first time across the crowded room, Kimberly felt something shift in her chest. Something dangerous, something like hope. She immediately looked away, heart hammering, terrified Benedict had noticed. Henry Sanchez, however, did not look away. He had spent years navigating political intrigue, surviving battlefields, reading the truth beneath polite lies. And in that single glance, he had recognized what no one else in that glittering ballroom seemed to see. Lady Kimberly Hughes was afraid. Not nervous, not shy, afraid. The evening proceeded with agonizing slowness. Benedict paraded her through conversations, correcting her posture with subtle touches that looked affectionate but felt like warnings. She sipped champagne she couldn't taste. She smiled until her cheeks ached. She existed in the peculiar hell of being surrounded by people while feeling utterly alone. Then came the moment that changed everything. Kimberly had been standing near the refreshment table, trying to steady her breathing, when a passing guest jostled her elbow. The glass of wine in her hand tilted, splashing crimson across the bodice of her lavender gown. Benedict was beside her instantly, his hand clamping around her wrist with bruising force. To anyone watching casually, it might have looked like concern, but Kimberly heard the venom in his whisper. "You clumsy fool, you've ruined—" "Unhand your wife." The voice cut through the noise of the ballroom like a knife through silk. Cold, commanding, unmistakable. Kimberly's breath caught as she looked up and found herself staring into the storm-gray eyes of the Duke of Devonshire. Henry Sanchez stood 3 feet away, his tall frame radiating controlled fury, his aristocratic features set in an expression that made even Benedict pause. The conversations around them began to falter, die, as guests turned to watch. "I beg your pardon." Benedict's tone dripped with false politeness, but his grip on Kimberly's wrist didn't loosen. "You heard me." Henry took a single step forward, and something in his movement made several people step back. "Let go of Lady Hughes. Now." The ballroom had gone silent. Kimberly could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel Benedict's fingers digging deeper into her skin, could see the dangerous calculation in her husband's eyes as he weighed his options. "My wife is—" "Your wife," Henry interrupted, his voice dropping to something lethal, "appears to be in distress, and I do not tolerate the mistreatment of ladies in my presence." For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. The Duke of Devonshire and Lord Benedict Hughes faced each other across 3 feet of marble floor, while Kimberly stood frozen between them, barely breathing. Then Henry did something that would set tongues wagging throughout London for months. He extended his hand toward Kimberly, palm up, his eyes never leaving Benedict's face. "Lady Hughes," he said quietly, "if you would do me the honor of standing with me for the remainder of this dance, I would be most grateful." It was not a request for a dance. Everyone in that ballroom understood what it truly was: a challenge, a protection, a claiming. And Kimberly, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane, made a choice that would alter the course of her entire life. She placed her hand in his. The scandal of that moment. Henry's hand extended, her trembling acceptance. Benedict's barely concealed fury rippled through London society like a stone thrown into still water. But what no one saw, what happened in the days that followed, was far worse than any ballroom drama. Benedict's punishment was swift and calculated. The morning after the ball, Kimberly woke to find her daily schedule posted on her dressing table, written in Benedict's precise hand. 7 a.m., rise. 7:30 a.m., breakfast, half portion. 8 a.m., correspondence, supervised. 9 a.m., embroidery. 12 p.m., luncheon. 1 p.m., music practice. 4 p.m., receive visitors, approved list only. Every hour, every movement, every breath accounted for. You embarrassed me, Benedict had said that morning, his voice calm as he adjusted his cravat in the mirror. You made a spectacle of yourself with the Duke of Devonshire. This is what happens when I give you freedom, Kimberly. You abuse it. He had confiscated her novels. The Jane Austen, the Maria Edgeworth, the poetry collections that had been her only escape. Frivolous nonsense that fills your head with romantic delusions, he'd declared, burning them in the library fireplace, while she stood watching, silent tears streaming down her face. Her maid, Sweet Mary, had been dismissed and replaced with Mrs. Dawson, a stern woman loyal only to Benedict. Her correspondence was read before being sent. Her wardrobe was chosen each morning. Even her portions at meals were controlled. A lady must maintain her figure, Benedict would say, though Kimberly had already grown too thin, her cheekbones sharp beneath translucent skin. Speak up, Kimberly, he would snap during dinner parties when she answered questions too softly. Then, when she raised her voice, don't screech like a fishwife. Have you no breeding? She learned there was no right answer, only endless corrections. 3 days before the Windsor Autumn Ball, Benedict had insisted they attend Lady Hartwell's garden party, another opportunity to display his perfect wife to society. Kimberly had worn a pale pink day dress with long sleeves despite the warmth, her hair arranged to hide the shadows under her eyes. She had been standing near the rose arbor, alone as always, when she heard the unmistakable timbre of conversation shifting. Heads turning, whispers rising like wind through leaves. The Duke of Devonshire had arrived. Kimberly had kept her eyes fixed on the roses, her heart suddenly racing. She told herself it was fear. It had to be fear. Lady Hughes. The voice was closer than she'd expected. She turned to find Henry Sanchez standing 3 feet away, his storm-gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Your Grace, she curtsied, keeping her gaze lowered. The roses are magnificent, he said conversationally, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't really talking about flowers. Though they look rather more vibrant than some of the guests. Before Kimberly could respond, Benedict appeared at her side, his hand landing on her arm in what looked like affection but felt like ownership. She flinched, just barely, just for a heartbeat. But it was enough. Henry's eyes darkened, tracking the movement with the precision of a marksman. Devonshire, Benedict said smoothly. What an unexpected pleasure. Hughes. Henry's gaze remained on Kimberly for a moment longer before shifting to her husband. I was just admiring your wife's evident appreciation for the gardens. The conversation that followed was polite, meaningless, deadly. But Kimberly felt it. The weight of Henry's attention, the way he positioned himself slightly between her and Benedict, the careful cataloguing of every detail. Later, as servants cleared the refreshment tables, Kimberly overheard 2 maids whispering near the garden wall. Did you see the way the Duke watched Lady Hughes? Every girl in London wants the Duke of Devonshire, except perhaps the one woman he seems most interested in watching. Poor thing, beautiful as a painting and just as trapped in her frame. Kimberly had fled to the carriage before the tears could fall. That evening, the invitation arrived. Thick cream paper, crimson wax seal, elegant script announcing the Windsor Autumn Ball. Benedict had smiled as he read it, that cold smile that never reached his eyes. "You'll attend, of course," he said. It wasn't a question. "And this time, Kimberly, you will not embarrass me. You will be perfect, or there will be consequences you won't forget." The invitation sat on the mantel like a death sentence wrapped in gold leaf, a glamorous trap she had no choice but to enter. The lavender silk gown had been Benedict's choice, of course. High-necked, long-sleeved, the color of bruised twilight. Perfect for concealing the finger-shaped marks on Kimberly's wrists and the shadow of a bruise along her collarbone. Her maid had laced the corset so tightly she could barely breathe, but Benedict had insisted. "You must look flawless tonight," he had said, circling her like a jeweler appraising a stone. "The Windsor Autumn Ball is not simply entertainment, Kimberly. It is theatre, and you are part of my performance." Now, standing beneath the crystal chandeliers of Windsor's grand ballroom, Kimberly felt like a butterfly pinned to velvet. Displayed, admired, utterly trapped. The light caught on thousands of crystals overhead, casting rainbow prisms across marble floors where London's elite gathered in their finest silks and jewels. Orchestra music swelled from the gallery. Laughter bubbled through conversations like champagne fizzing in crystal flutes. She trembled, despite the warmth of hundreds of bodies pressed into the glittering space. Benedict kept one hand possessively at the small of her back as he steered her through the crowd, stopping to exchange pleasantries with earls and viscounts, with members of Parliament, with anyone who might further his ambitions. Kimberly smiled on cue, curtsied when appropriate, spoke only when directly addressed. "My wife is rather quiet this evening," Benedict said to Lord Pemberton, his tone suggesting fondness while his fingers dug into her spine. "Though I find her silence rather becoming. So many women talk far too much, wouldn't you agree?" Pemberton laughed. Kimberly kept her smile fixed, her eyes downcast. "Invisible," she told herself. "Just be invisible." Then the room shifted. It was subtle at first, a ripple in conversation, heads turning, a collective intake of breath. Kimberly felt it before she saw it, the arrival of someone whose presence commanded attention without demanding it. Henry Sanchez, Duke of Devonshire, entered the ballroom like a storm rolling across still water. He wore black evening clothes that made his tall frame seem even more imposing, his dark hair gleaming under chandelier light, his aristocratic features composed in an expression of calm authority that somehow made every other man in the room look diminished. He moved through the crowd with effortless grace, nodding to acquaintances, pausing to speak with the Duke of Wellington, his very presence shifting the energy of the entire gathering. Kimberly's breath caught. As if sensing her gaze, Henry looked up, and their eyes met across 50 feet of crowded ballroom. The world seemed to narrow to that single point of connection. His storm-gray eyes held hers for one heartbeat, two, and in that instant Kimberly felt seen in a way that terrified and thrilled her simultaneously. She wrenched her gaze away, heart hammering, cheeks flushing. "Don't notice me. Please don't notice me." But from his position near the orchestra gallery, Henry continued to watch. He watched as Benedict paraded Kimberly through another round of conversations, correcting her posture with subtle touches that made her shoulders tense. He watched as she clasped her hands together to hide their trembling. He watched as she smiled with lips that never reached her eyes. "Lady Hughes seems rather pale tonight," someone remarked to Benedict. "My wife has always been delicate," Benedict replied smoothly, his hand tightening on her arm. "It's part of her charm." Henry's jaw tightened. An hour into the ball, Kimberly stood near the refreshment table, trying to steady her breathing while Benedict engaged in political discussion several feet away. She reached for a glass of wine with shaking hands, grateful for a moment alone. A passing guest, Lord Ashford, turned too quickly, his elbow catching hers. The glass tilted. Time seemed to slow. Crimson wine splashed across the bodice of her lavender gown, spreading like toxic substance across silk. Kimberly froze, horror washing over her in a cold wave. Benedict was beside her in an instant, his hand clamping around her wrist with bruising force. To the casual observer, it might have looked like steadying concern, but Kimberly heard the venom beneath his whispered words. "You clumsy, worthless fool. Do you have any idea how much that gown cost? You've humiliated me. Unhand your wife." The voice cut through the ballroom like a blade through silk, cold and commanding and unmistakable. Every conversation within 20 feet died instantly, and Kimberly looked up to find Henry Sanchez standing before her, fury blazing in his storm-gray eyes. The ballroom held its collective breath. Benedict's fingers dug deeper into Kimberly's wrist, his grip like iron wrapped in velvet gloves. His smile remained fixed, the perfect mask of a concerned husband, but his whisper dripped toxic. "You've ruined everything, you stupid girl. When we return home, you'll learn what happens to wives who can't manage the simplest—" "I said unhand your wife." Henry's voice was quieter this time, but somehow more dangerous. He stood less than 3 feet away now, his tall frame radiating controlled fury, his storm-gray eyes locked on Benedict with an intensity that made the air crackle. The conversations around them didn't just pause, they evaporated. Guests turned to stare, fans freezing mid-flutter, champagne glasses suspended halfway to lips. Even the orchestra seemed to sense the shift, the music faltering before the conductor hurriedly directed them to continue at a lower volume. Benedict's jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, Kimberly thought he might actually comply. Then his politician's instincts took over, and he forced a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Your Grace, I appreciate your concern, but I assure you, I'm merely attending to my wife after an unfortunate accident. She can be rather clumsy." "Can she?" Henry took another step forward, and something in the movement made Benedict's smile falter. "Or is she trembling because your grip is cutting off her circulation?" The silence that followed was absolute. Kimberly couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The wine stains spread across her gown like accusation, but all she could feel was Benedict's fingers grinding the delicate bones of her wrist, and all she could see was Henry's face, aristocratic features carved from fury, and something that looked almost like protection. "This is a private matter between husband and wife," Benedict said, his voice hardening beneath the veneer of civility. "I would thank you not to interfere in the mistreatment of a lady." Henry's eyebrow lifted fractionally. "I'm afraid I cannot offer such courtesy." The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the spectacle like moths to flame. Kimberly could hear the whispers starting, scandalized, excited, hungry for gossip that would fuel drawing-room conversations for weeks. "Your Grace, you overstep." Benedict's mask was cracking now, real anger bleeding through. His grip on Kimberly's wrist tightened further, making her gasp softly. Henry's eyes darkened to the color of thunderclouds. "Let her go." Each word fell like a hammer blow. Several gentlemen in the crowd shifted, uncomfortably, but no one moved to intervene. No one dared step between a duke and his target. Benedict held his ground, pride and fury warring across his features. "She is my wife." "Then perhaps," Henry interrupted, his voice dropping to something lethal, "you should treat her as such, rather than as property to be manhandled in public." The gasps that rippled through the crowd were audible now. This was beyond scandal. This was a direct challenge to Benedict's authority, his reputation, his very claim to his wife. For one terrible moment, Kimberly thought Benedict might strike Henry right there in the middle of Windsor's ballroom. She felt his hand shaking with barely suppressed rage, saw the vein pulsing in his temple. Then Henry did something that would be whispered about in every drawing-room in London for months to come. He extended his hand toward Kimberly, palm up, steady, unwavering, his eyes never leaving Benedict's face. "Lady Hughes," he said quietly, each word precisely enunciated, "if your husband cannot treat you with the dignity and gentleness you deserve, then I suggest you stand with me for the remainder of this evening. The lady deserves protection you clearly cannot provide." The ballroom erupted. Whispers became exclamations. Fans snapped open. Someone dropped a glass, the crystal shattering on marble like punctuation. Benedict's face went scarlet, then white. "You have no right." "I have every right," Henry said calmly, "to ensure that ladies in my presence are treated with respect." His hand remained extended, waiting. Kimberly's entire world narrowed to that moment. Benedict's bruising grip on one wrist, Henry's offered hand before her, and the choice she had never been allowed to make. The choice between the cage she knew and the terrifying possibility of freedom. Her hand trembled as she lifted it from her side. Benedict's grip tightened painfully. "Kimberly, if you dare—" She placed her hand in Henry's. The scandal detonated like cannon fire. Henry's fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, gentle, and Benedict was forced to release her or create an even greater scene. His hand dropped, his face contorted with rage barely contained by society's expectations. "This," Benedict hissed, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "will have consequences." "For you," Henry said quietly, drawing Kimberly closer to his side, his body positioning itself as a shield between her and her husband. "Most certainly for you." And as the ballroom dissolved into chaos, as whispers became roars and Kimberly stood trembling beside the most powerful duke in England, she realized something profound and terrifying. She had just become the center of the greatest scandal of the season. And there was no going back. The morning after the Windsor Ball, Henry Sanchez sat in his study with documents spread across mahogany like pieces of a dark puzzle. He had not slept, could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Kimberly's face, the fear, the trembling, the way she had flinched when Benedict touched her. He had witnessed battlefield horrors, political betrayals, the worst of humanity's cruelty. But something about that gentle woman's silent suffering had ignited a fury in him that demanded action. So he had called in favors. His man of business, Thomas Wright, had connections throughout London's legal and financial networks. His former military colleague, Captain James Morrison, knew how to extract information from reluctant sources. By dawn, the truth had begun emerging like bones uncovered from shallow graves. "Your Grace," Wright said, entering with another file, his expression grim, "you need to see this." The marriage contract was a masterpiece of legal manipulation. Henry's trained eye caught the inconsistencies immediately. Dates that didn't align, signatures that looked subtly different from known examples, clauses that contradicted standard legal practice. "Her father signed this?" Henry asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Baron Ashton's signature appears on the document," Wright said carefully. "But our handwriting expert believes it may have been encouraged. The Baron received a rather substantial sum 3 days before the wedding, £50,000 deposited directly into an account that was, at the time, days away from complete ruin." Henry's jaw tightened. "Bribery, or blackmail disguised as generosity." Wright laid out another document. "And there's more. Lady Hughes' dowry, £10,000 as stated in the contract, was never actually transferred to Lord Hughes' accounts. Instead, it was absorbed into a series of investments that Hughes controlled entirely. In essence, he took her inheritance without providing the legal protections a dowry should guarantee. He stole from her. Henry's voice was ice. Technically, yes. But the documents are crafted cleverly enough that proving it would require— Wright hesitated. It would require testimony from the lady herself. Henry stood, pacing to the window overlooking his London estate. Rain streaked the glass like tears. What else? Captain Morrison stepped forward, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. "I made inquiries at the Ashton estate in Somerset. The servants talk. They always do. Lady Hughes wrote to her family weekly after the marriage. Letters expressing concern, asking for visits, eventually begging for help. Eventually? Not a single letter reached them. Hughes intercepted everything. The family believes she simply stopped writing, that marriage made her forget them. The rage that swept through Henry was white-hot and carefully controlled. He had learned in war that fury was useless unless channeled into strategy. "She's not just unhappy," he said quietly, pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. "She's trapped in an illegal union. The contract is fraudulent, the dowry misappropriated, and her family has been deliberately isolated from her." "Your Grace," Wright said carefully, "these are serious allegations against a man with considerable political influence. If you pursue this—" "I will pursue this." Henry turned from the window, his expression hardening into something that had made enemy generals retreat. "Because that woman is suffering in a prison built of forged documents and stolen money, and I will not allow it to continue." 3 days later, a leather-bound book arrived at the Hughes residence, delivered by a footman in unmarked livery. Inside the cover, pressed between pages of poetry, was a note written in careful script. "If you wish to be free, you must first understand your cage. Begin with the marriage contract. Look for inconsistencies in dates and signatures. Trust your intelligence. You are not alone. A friend." Kimberly's hands trembled as she read it, recognizing the careful phrasing, the implicit protection. She knew who had sent it, and for the first time in 2 years, something fierce and long dormant stirred in her chest. Courage. That night, while Benedict entertained colleagues in his study, Kimberly slipped into his private office. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she searched through locked drawers. She had stolen the key weeks ago, a small act of defiance she'd been too afraid to use. Until now. The marriage contract was buried beneath ledgers and correspondence. She pulled it out with shaking hands, studying it by candlelight, seeing what she had been too young and naive to notice before. Her father's signature looked wrong. The date conflicted with her memory. The terms were far harsher than she'd been told. This wasn't just cruelty. This was fraud. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Kimberly's breath stopped. She folded the document quickly, tucking it into the bodice of her gown just as Benedict's voice called from downstairs. "Kimberly, where are you?" "Coming." Her voice somehow remained steady. She returned the key, closed the drawer, and slipped from the office like a ghost. In her chamber, minutes later, she pressed the stolen document against her racing heart and allowed herself something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. The evidence that could destroy Benedict Hughes lay hidden against her skin, waiting. The servants appeared like shadows, unobtrusive, loyal, watchful. Mrs. Henshaw, the new cook at the Hughes household, had impeccable references and a quiet demeanor that Benedict approved without question. What he didn't know was that she reported directly to Henry's steward every evening, detailing Benedict's movements, his moods, the raised voices behind closed doors. The young footman, Peter, hired to replace one who'd mysteriously left service, had sharp eyes that tracked every time Benedict's hand gripped Kimberly's arm too tightly, every meal she was denied, every humiliation disguised as discipline. Even the flower seller, outside the Hughes residence on Grosvenor Square, an elderly woman Benedict never noticed, was part of Henry's careful network of protection. Kimberly didn't know the full extent of it, but she sensed it. The way prey senses a predator's attention has shifted elsewhere. She felt safer walking through her own home, though she couldn't explain why. What she did know was how to lie now. "Where were you this afternoon?" Benedict demanded one evening, his eyes cold over dinner. "In the garden, my lord. Reading scripture, as you suggested." The lie came smoothly. Practiced, She had actually been in the library, studying the marriage contract she'd stolen, memorizing every fraudulent detail. "Your complexion is improved. You haven't been sneaking sweets again?" "No, my lord, only what you permit." Truth wrapped around omission. She was eating better because Mrs. Henshaw secretly provided fuller portions. Benedict's suspicion was a living thing, growing each day like toxic ivy climbing walls. The ballroom scandal had damaged his reputation. Society whispered about the Duke of Devonshire's intervention. Questions were being asked in places Benedict couldn't control. His violence sharpened accordingly. A broken teacup resulted in Kimberly being locked in her chambers for 2 days. A letter from her mother, the first to reach her in months, was burned before she could read it. When she dared ask why, Benedict's backhanded slap sent her crashing against the wall. "You belong to me," he hissed, gripping her jaw. "Every breath, every thought, mine, and if that Duke thinks he can interfere, he'll learn what it costs to challenge Benedict Hughes." But then came the garden party at Kensington Palace. Kimberly had been standing alone near the fountain, her face carefully composed despite the bruise hidden beneath powder on her cheekbone, when Henry materialized beside her as if summoned by her desperation. "Lady Hughes?" His voice was low, meant only for her. "Your Grace." She curtsied, not daring to meet his eyes. "You've been avoiding me." "I've been careful." "Careful." He said the word like it tasted bitter. "Is that what we call it when a woman must hide bruises beneath face powder?" Kimberly's breath caught. Her hand instinctively moved toward her cheek before she could stop it. Henry stepped closer, not improper, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him, the solid safety he represented. "I have people watching. I know what he's doing to you." "You shouldn't." Her voice cracked. "Your Grace, if he discovers your interference, he'll destroy you. He has connections, political allies. Let him try." Henry's storm-gray eyes blazed with controlled fury. "I have survived battlefields and political intrigue far more dangerous than Benedict Hughes, but I cannot bear watching you suffer without—" "Without what?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Without doing everything in my power to free you." The words hung between them like a promise and a threat. Around them, society mingled and gossiped, but in that moment, they existed in a bubble of dangerous intimacy. "They're saying you favor me," Kimberly whispered, desperation bleeding through her careful control. "That you've taken an interest. Benedict watches me constantly, questions everyone I speak to. The servants are terrified. I'm terrified." "I know." Henry's hand twitched as if he wanted to reach for her but knew he couldn't. "Not here, not with 100 eyes watching. But I also know you're stronger than you believe. You've survived 2 years of his cruelty. You've stolen evidence from his office. You're learning to fight back. How do you—" She stared at him, comprehension dawning. "The servants, they're yours. Some of them, not all, but enough to keep you safer than you were." Tears pricked her eyes, relief and terror in equal measure. "If he finds out, he won't. And Kimberly—" He said her name like a prayer, like something precious. "You need to know something. Hughes is planning to accuse me of impropriety. He's gathering witnesses to claim we've been conducting an affair. It's false, but the scandal alone could—" "Then we must stop meeting." The words tore from her throat. "I won't let him destroy you because of me." "He won't destroy me." Henry's voice dropped to iron certainty. "Because I'm going to destroy him first. But I need your help. I need you to trust me." The garden spun around her. The fountain's music, the distant laughter, the weight of everything she'd endured and everything she still feared. Benedict's shadow loomed over her entire existence, but here stood Henry, offering something she'd thought impossible. Hope, protection, partnership. Kimberly looked up at him then, really looked at him, and saw not just a powerful duke, but a man who saw her, truly saw her, and deemed her worth defending. "Please." The word came out trembling, raw, with 2 years of suppressed desperation. "I want to be free." Henry's expression softened into something fierce and tender. "Then we begin." The accusation came at White's Gentlemen's Club, calculated for maximum impact. Benedict Hughes stood before a gathering of peers and politicians, his voice carrying the perfect blend of wounded dignity and righteous anger. "Gentlemen, I come to you with a matter most distressing. The Duke of Devonshire has been conducting an inappropriate association with my wife. I have witnesses who will testify to secret meetings, exchanged correspondence, and behavior unbecoming of both a peer and a married woman." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Several men shifted uncomfortably. Affairs were common enough among the aristocracy, but to publicly accuse a duke, particularly one as respected as Henry Sanchez, required either tremendous courage or spectacular foolishness. Henry, seated near the fireplace with a glass of brandy, didn't even blink. Indeed, he set down his glass with deliberate calm. "Then I suggest, Lord Hughes, that we settle this matter through proper channels. I welcome a full investigation into my conduct." Benedict's satisfied smile faltered slightly. "Furthermore," Henry continued, rising to his full height, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded military regiments, "I suggest this investigation extend to all parties involved. After all, if we're examining propriety and legal conduct, we should be thorough. Your marriage contract, for instance, your financial dealings, the circumstances under which Lady Hughes became your wife." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "You dare!" Benedict's face flushed crimson. "I dare seek truth," Henry said quietly, dangerously. "Do you?" Benedict had no choice but to agree, trapped by his own accusation, but as he left White's that evening, his rage was a palpable thing, promising violence. That night, Kimberly worked with trembling hands in Benedict's office. The ledgers were massive, leather-bound evidence of financial crimes spanning years. She had studied them over weeks, memorizing which pages mattered most, which transactions revealed the illegal appropriation of her dowry, which accounts showed the bribery of her father. Now she carefully removed the most damning pages, folding them small enough to hide in the lining of her cloak. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain someone would hear it echoing through the house. The clock struck midnight. She froze, listening. Footsteps. Benedict's study door opened. Kimberly barely managed to close the ledger and step away from the desk before Benedict entered, his eyes immediately suspicious, scanning the room like a predator sensing disturbed prey. "What are you doing here?" His voice was ice. I couldn't sleep. I came looking for—" "Liar." He crossed the room in 3 strides, gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. "You've been sneaking around my private papers, haven't you? What have you taken?" "Nothing. I swear, I only—" His fist connected with her cheekbone, snapping her head to the side. Pain exploded across her face. She tasted copper, felt visible injury in her mouth. "You conspire with that Duke against me." Benedict's control shattered completely. "You think I don't see it? You think I don't know you're trying to destroy me?" Another blow, this time to her ribs. Kimberly crumpled, gasping, the stolen pages pressed against her skin beneath her dress. "You're mine," Benedict hissed, standing over her. "And if you've taken anything from this office, I will make you regret the day you were born." He left her there on the floor, locking the study door behind him. Kimberly lay in darkness, pain radiating through her body, but clutching one desperate thought: the evidence was still hidden, still safe. She had to get it to Henry. Dawn found her at the servants' entrance of Henry's Mayfair residence, wrapped in a heavy shawl that hid the bruising across her face and ribs. The stolen pages were tucked against her heart. The door opened immediately, as if Henry's people had been watching for her. Henry appeared moments later, his expression transforming from concern to fury when he saw her face. He ushered her into his private study, dismissed the servants, and turned to her with barely controlled rage. "He did this." It doesn't matter. Kimberly's voice was steadier than she felt. She pulled the folded documents from her bodice with shaking hands. This matters. This is everything. The proof of the bribery, the dowry theft, all of it. Henry took the pages carefully, as if they were made of glass and hope. His eyes scanned the entries, and with each line, his expression hardened further. "This is enough," he said quietly. "More than enough to destroy him legally, financially, socially. He'll take my life before he lets that happen." Kimberly's whisper cracked. "Henry, I'm so afraid." He was before her in an instant, taking her hands in his, gentle despite the fury radiating from him, warm despite the cold fear that gripped her. "Look at me," he commanded softly. She raised her eyes to his storm-gray gaze. "I will free you," Henry said, each word a vow forged in steel and fire. "I will dismantle every lie he's built, expose every crime he's committed, and ensure you never have to fear him again. And God help the man who stands in my way." Kimberly's tears finally fell, but for the first time in 2 years, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of hope. The royal winter ball glittered with deceptive beauty. Ice sculptures gleaming under crystal chandeliers, nobles draped in velvet and diamonds, the air thick with perfume and the promise of scandal. Benedict Hughes arrived with his wife on his arm, like a trophy, determined to prove his control remained absolute. Kimberly wore emerald silk chosen to match his waistcoat, her bruises expertly hidden beneath powder and pearls. To the watching ton, they appeared the perfect couple. Only those who looked closely saw her trembling. Henry stood near the dais where the Prince Regent held court, flanked by representatives from the Crown's legal office. He had spent 3 weeks building an unassailable case, gathering witnesses, authenticating documents. Tonight was not about passion or impulse. Tonight was about justice. The evening proceeded with agonizing civility, dances, conversations, the performance of aristocratic normalcy. Benedict paraded Kimberly through the crowd, his possessive grip on her arm a constant reminder of ownership. Then the music paused between sets, and Henry stepped forward. "Lord Hughes," his voice carried across the suddenly silent ballroom. "A word, if you please." Benedict's smile was pure venom. "Your Grace, come to make more accusations. My lawyers are quite prepared to address your slanderers. This isn't slander." Henry's tone could have frozen wine in crystal glasses. "This is truth, before witnesses, before the Crown." The crowd pressed closer, sensing toxic substance in the water. Benedict's hand tightened on Kimberly's arm, making her gasp. "You have no authority." "But I do." Lord Chancellor Eldon stepped forward, his presence commanding instant silence. "His Grace has presented evidence of serious crimes. Evidence that demands immediate investigation." "This is absurd." Benedict's control cracked. He yanked Kimberly closer, using her as a shield. "My wife is complicit in whatever lies he's manufactured. She's been conspiring with him for months, haven't you, my dear?" He shook her roughly. "Tell them how you've been sneaking around, playing the victim." "Let her go." Henry's voice dropped to something lethal. "She's mine." Benedict's rage finally erupted completely. He grabbed Kimberly's face, forcing her to look at the crowd, his fingers digging into bruised flesh. "Look at her, trembling, pathetic. Do you think she's worth defending? She's nothing but—" Henry crossed the space between them in 3 strides, his fist connected with Benedict's jaw with the full force of military training and righteous fury. Benedict released Kimberly, stumbling backward into a marble column as the ballroom erupted in gasps and shouts. "Enough!" The Lord Chancellor's voice cut through chaos. "Lord Hughes, you are hereby detained pending investigation into charges of fraud, forgery, theft, and unlawful imprisonment." "On what evidence?" Benedict spat cold, his face contorted with rage and fear. Henry produced the documents with deliberate calm, each page a nail in Benedict's coffin. Your forged marriage contract, with signatures that don't match authenticated examples. Financial records showing the illegal seizure of Lady Hughes's dowry. Testimony from Baron Ashton regarding the £50,000 used to coerce his consent. Letters intercepted between you and your co-conspirators. The Lord Chancellor examined each document, his expression darkening. Around them the crowd had gone utterly silent, witnessing the destruction of a man's entire existence. "The marriage," Eldon pronounced, "is void, the contract fraudulent. Lord Hughes, you are stripped of your position pending trial. Your assets are frozen. Your title—" He paused, the weight of history in his words. "Is forfeit." Benedict's face went white, then purple. "No, no, you can't." "It is done." The Lord Chancellor turned to Kimberly, his expression softening. "Lady Hughes, or rather Miss Ashton, as that is now your legal name, you are free. The Crown offers its deepest apologies for the suffering you have endured." The words didn't register immediately. Kimberly stood frozen, the world spinning around her. Free, he'd said free, but what did that even mean after 2 years of... Her knees buckled. Henry caught her before she hit the floor, gathering her into his arms with infinite gentleness. She collapsed against his chest, 2 years of suppressed agony breaking through in great, shuddering sobs. "I have you," Henry whispered against her hair, his voice cracking with emotion he'd kept controlled for weeks. "You're safe now. I have you." Benedict lunged forward, murder in his eyes. "She's mine!" Guards seized him, dragging him away as he screamed threats and curses that echoed through the stunned ballroom. Henry lifted Kimberly fully into his arms, cradling her as if she was something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. The crowd parted before them like a sea, nobles and servants alike stepping back in reverent silence. As he carried her toward the doors, past hundreds of watching faces, past the wreckage of Benedict's destroyed reputation, past the gossip that would fuel London society for years, Kimberly lifted her head from his shoulder and whispered, "Thank you." "No," Henry said quietly, his storm-gray eyes blazing with something that looked remarkably like love. "Thank you for being brave enough to fight, for trusting me, for surviving." The ballroom doors closed behind them, muting the explosion of conversation. And for the first time in 2 years, Kimberly Hughes breathed as a free woman. Spring returned to England with gentle insistence, coaxing blossoms from bare branches and warmth from frozen earth. 3 months had passed since the Royal Winter Ball, 3 months that had transformed Kimberly's entire existence. The formal annulment had been swift, the Crown's investigation thorough and damning. Benedict Hughes awaited trial in debtor's prison, his title stripped, his fortune seized to repay those he'd defrauded, including Kimberly's dowry, returned in full to her family. Her father had come to London the day after the ball, tears streaming down his weathered face as he held his daughter for the first time in 2 years. "Forgive me," he'd whispered, broken. "I thought I was securing your future. Instead, I sold you to a monster." "You were deceived," Kimberly had told him, her own tears falling freely. "We all were. But it's over now." Her mother arrived days later, and together they had helped Kimberly move from the Hughes residence, now seized by the Crown, to a suite of rooms in Henry's guest wing. Proper, chaperoned, safe. For the first time in her adult life, Kimberly woke each morning without fear. She had spent the winter healing, not just the physical bruises that faded from her skin, but the deeper wounds that had nearly destroyed her spirit. She read novels without guilt, walked through gardens without permission, wrote letters that actually reached their destinations. She learned, slowly and painfully, how to be free. And through it all, Henry had been there. Not hovering, not possessive, but present. A steady presence that asked nothing and offered everything. Until today. Kimberly stood in the rose garden of Henry's country estate, watching early blooms unfurl in the April sunshine. The air smelled of earth and growing things, of possibilities and new beginnings. She wore a simple morning dress of pale yellow, her choice not dictated by anyone, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders. She looked, she realized with quiet wonder, happy. "I thought I might find you here." Henry's voice was soft, careful not to startle her. She turned to find him standing at the garden entrance, dressed simply in shirt sleeves and waistcoat, his storm-gray eyes warm in the golden light. "The roses are blooming," she said, gesturing to the bushes. "Your gardener says they're the finest in 3 counties. I wouldn't know." Henry moved closer, his boots crunching softly on gravel paths. "I've never paid them much attention, until recently." Something in his tone made her heart quicken. "What changed?" "You." The single word hung between them, weighted with months of unspoken emotion. "Watching you discover joy in simple things, flowers, books, sunlight. It makes me see the world differently." Kimberly's breath caught. They had danced around this for months, this growing connection that was more than gratitude, deeper than friendship. "Henry," she began, unsure how to continue. He closed the remaining distance between them, near enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the vulnerability in his eyes, emotions he showed to no one else. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "Something I should have said months ago, but I was afraid you would think your feelings were born from gratitude or dependence rather than genuine choice." "What do you need to tell me?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "That I didn't save you out of duty." The words came raw, honest, stripped of aristocratic polish. "I saved you because from the moment I saw you trembling in that ballroom, something in me recognized something in you. And every day since, every conversation, every moment of watching you reclaim your strength, Kimberly, I cannot imagine a life without you in it." Tears pricked her eyes, but they were tears of joy, of recognition, of a truth she'd been afraid to name. "I thought I wanted freedom," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "And I do. I did. But Henry, freedom means nothing if I can't choose who to share it with. And I choose you. Not because you saved me, but because you saw me when I was invisible, because you made me remember I was worth saving, because when I think of my future, you're in every imagined moment." Henry's hand rose to cup her face with infinite gentleness, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "Are you certain? You've only just begun to discover who you are outside that cage. I won't trap you in another. You could never trap me." Kimberly placed her hand over his, holding it against her cheek. "You're the one who taught me how to fly." He kissed her then, softly, reverently, as if she were made of starlight and promises. It was nothing like the crushing possessiveness she'd known before. This was choice, partnership, love freely given and joyfully received. When they finally parted, Henry rested his forehead against hers, both of them smiling through tears. "Marry me," he whispered. "When you're ready. No rush, no pressure. Just someday. Let me spend my life proving you made the right choice." "Yes." The word came without hesitation, without fear. "Yes, Henry. 1,000 times, yes." The wedding took place 6 months later in the same rose garden where he'd proposed, intimate and perfect. Kimberly wore cream silk and orange blossoms, her family surrounding her with love, society watching with whispered awe. The Duke of Devonshire had married the woman he'd saved from a monster, but those who truly understood knew the deeper truth. Kimberly had saved herself. Henry had simply given her the tools and stood beside her while she fought. Their story became legend, whispered in drawing rooms, referenced in cautionary tales, celebrated as proof that courage and love could triumph over cruelty and control. A duke who had defied the ton to protect the vulnerable, a woman who had risen from ashes to reclaim her life. A love forged through sacrifice, patience, and the fundamental belief that everyone deserved freedom. Years later, when their children asked how their parents met, Kimberly would smile and say, "Your father saw me when I was invisible, and I learned that true love doesn't imprison, it liberates." She was once a prisoner in her own marriage, trapped behind gilded bars and false smiles. Now she walks beside the most desired duke in England, not as property, not as ornament, but as partner, equal, beloved. Cherished, protected, and finally, gloriously free. Dear listeners, thank you for staying with us until the end. If this story moved you, please subscribe, like, comment, and share it with someone close to you. Your support inspires us to keep creating stories filled with love, healing, and unforgettable twists.